Anything Ghost, number 314. Welcome to Anything Ghost. My name is Lex Wall. Anything Ghost has been around since 2006. It's a place where people share their personal ghost stories or local ghost legends, and I share them with you. I have some interesting stories coming your way for episode number 314, so stick around. Okay, the first story we have is from Jay in California. Haunted childhood home. When I was in high school, we moved into a house where the previous owner had recently passed away. My parents, being religious, decided to have a prayer session and asked that the house be blessed and for any evil spirits to be removed from the home. The second they finished their prayers, the back door slammed shut so hard that the wall shook. We all froze and then looked at each other with disbelief. There were no other doors or windows open, and the air conditioner was not on either. From then on, any sound we heard at night or when something unusual happened, we would jokingly blame it on the ghost. Being a teenager and prone to messing with my older brother, I decided to play a prank on him one night. I snuck into his room and hid under his bed while he was brushing his teeth. About 10 minutes after he turned off the light, I reached up and put my hand on him. He screamed and jumped out of bed so fast he stumbled into the wall. When he turned on the light and saw it was me, the punches started flying. I was honestly laughing so hard I didn't really feel the barrage of fists. I made it back to my room and tried my best to sleep, content what I had thought was the best prank ever. A few nights later, I woke up suddenly, and a man was standing in my room staring at me. He was an older gentleman, skinny with dark hair. I didn't scream. I was in disbelief. So I closed my eyes, rubbed them, and opened them back up. He was still there. I sat up in bed, breathing a little heavy, and then he started to move. He turned and walked through my door into the hallway. The door was closed. I shot out of bed and opened the door. He was still there, walking through the house. I followed him into the living room where he abruptly disappeared. I know I wasn't dreaming, because I didn't go back to sleep after that. I told my parents about it, and they said the description matched that of the previous owner. A few months later, I woke up with my arms suspended above my head. It had that dead feeling when you fall asleep on it, and it takes a few moments for you to move it. But it was sticking straight out with my hand limp, like someone was holding me by the wrist. As soon as I tried to move, my entire arm went limp, and my hand came down as dead weight, smacking me right in the face. I popped up and looked around in the dark. There was no one there. At that point, I figured it was our ghost, and he was punishing me for playing pranks in his house. My brother and I, being close in age, had also been in a couple fights that put some holes in the wall. I've wondered if our behavior or presence increased the activity. My brother moved out shortly after high school, and I had no more incidents. Even when I go back to visit, there is no activity. However, my brother's kids, when they stay there, now talk about having strange encounters. And my daughter feels uneasy and won't sleep in my old room when she visits my parents. So I'm beginning to think the ghost has a disdain for teenagers. And the next story comes to us from Kirstie in the U.S. Something strange in the kitchen. Before I get started, I would like to say I love this podcast. I've been listening since 2006, and I've even sent in some stories many years ago. The one I'm sending in tonight is about the kitchen in the house my husband and I currently live in. There's one creepy spot in our kitchen in which several strange things have happened. But before I talk about that, I'll describe the layout of the house. Our kitchen and laundry room are attached to one another. When you do laundry and walk out, you're right in the creepy corner of our kitchen, and you can see the entrance to the living room. One evening I was standing in that corner while watching TV. The TV is in the living room. I was really sucked into the show that was playing, and I wasn't paying attention to my surroundings. But then something snapped me out of it. That was hearing my husband's voice say, "Babe," right behind me. I thought that maybe he was in the bathroom, but I turned around and no one was there. Right after that, I heard my husband walk out of our bedroom, which is pretty far from where I had heard his voice. A while after that, I was in our bedroom and my husband walked in with an unsettled facial expression. He told me he had been standing in that same corner of the kitchen and that he heard my voice say, "Sweetheart," behind him. What makes that even creepier is that I don't call anyone sweetheart. One evening, I was getting ready to feed my dogs. I bent over to pick up their food dishes, and I heard someone behind me say, "I'm here," as clear as day. The voice sounded like that of my mom's, who had passed away just months prior to that. Not sure why she would have been in our house, though, since she'd never visited this place while she was living. And we get stories about a ghost actually mocking people that live in a certain house. And I'm sure that's been used in movies too. But thanks for the story, Kirstie. And next up are a couple of stories from Franklin B. I'm not sure what city or state he lives in, but he worked at the Hillview Public Works. And he had several experiences there, and here he is to tell you about them.
Hello, my name is Franklin B., and I have a couple of quick ghostly stories to tell you on this Friday the 13th, 2024, as I sit here and reflect my time at Hillview Public Works, and myself and a few co-workers have witnessed over the years, and I thought they would be apropos for your podcast. To begin my first ghostly encounter at Hillview Public Works, a friend of mine, Pete, and I recently have talked about different paranormal situations and stories over the years, one of which were stories about the old TV show Dark Shadows, starring the reluctant vampire Barnabas Collins. I have seen every episode of the old Dark Shadows program, as I own the complete DVD collection of over 1,200 episodes, but I share those from time to time with Pete because he's a follower of vampirish type weird stories and that kind of thing. So there was one night as we at the Public Works there in Hillview get called in for different alarms and things when we're on call. So one night, it must have been about midnight or 11 o'clock or some such thing on a weekend. It was very quiet. I was seemingly the only one in the place when I was sitting at the computer, and all of a sudden I hear behind me this sort of ghoulish voice, and it was very clear, and it just went, "Oh." Well, I immediately thought, oh, Pete must be here, because we were just talking about an episode of Dark Shadows, and he must be doing the old impersonation of Barnabas Collins trying to scare me. So I said sort of out loud, it's like, ha ha ha, very funny, Pete. As I turned around, fully expecting to see Pete standing there with a grin on his face, but to my utter amazement, no one was there. So I thought, Pete must have ducked away faster than I thought, and being the quick, sly, debonair person that he is, probably was eluding my wrath. So I got up from the chair and dashed out to the hallway, fully expecting to find Pete peeking around the corner of a doorway to another office or room, only to find no one but a dark, silent hallway. I thought, okay, that's funny. He must have been faster than I thought. So I went out into the garage area there at the Hillview Public Works and looked all around. Again, everything was dark, silent, and no Pete to be found. So I thought, well, I don't know where he was, but I'm sure it was his voice with his tone doing the old Barnabas Collins impersonation. So I thought, well, I'll look and see if his car is out in the parking lot. I went to the window, looked out in the parking lot, and of course, what did I find? Not one car other than my own. So needless to say, this was reminiscent of other ghostly encounters that I've heard other people from the Hillview Public Works talk about, leading me to think that perhaps there's some ghastly apparitions floating around the place that may or may not be explainable to this day. Of course, I approached Pete about this the following day, and he claims that he was sleeping like a baby down the road at his house in Hillview, about a quarter mile from Patterson, Illinois, where we both basically lived in a small neighborhood. Be that as it may, I constantly, from now on, if I'm at the Public Works building there in Hillview, I will take it upon myself to reflect on this one particular night that I was absolutely, positively, without a shadow, no pun intended, of a doubt, that I heard Pete mocking me from the hallway, only to find there was no one there, not even Barnabas himself.
And we have some more stories from Franklin B. And this file is about the resident loud ghost.
Hello, this is Franklin B. coming at you once again with another ghost story on Friday the 13th, 2024, from the archives of the Hillview Public Works ghostly encounters that I've heard tell of over the years. My friend Stephanie at the Hillview Public Works there has giving me the opportunity to come up with these stories, hopefully so you can put them on your Halloween ensemble coming up in a month or so, and here I'm obliged to try to help and do that. So my first story with Pete and the Barnabas Collins affair was just one in several different episodes that I've heard over the years of people talking about disembodied spiritual ghostly voices coming from simply out of nowhere. One story that comes to mind is there are two fellow co-workers of mine that always like to kid around with one another, so to speak. They're the best of friends, but let's call number one Jay and number two George. They always, when they greet each other, they say things like, "Hey, how you doing today?" And it's like, "I'm just fine, you old bitch," or some such thing like that, but all in good humor, knowing that they're coming from the best of friends. Well, one night, Jay was sort of like me, coming in to work on a weekend at I'd say midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, thereabouts. Everything was dark, very quiet. As he's walking through the garage at Hillview there, we have an upstairs, sort of a junk room, catch-all, alcove, balcony area, and where we keep a lot of Halloween decorations, Christmas decorations, old public works files, etc. And he's walking through the garage. All of a sudden, from up in that alcove, he hears very distinctly in Uncle George's voice, "Hey." So he thought, "Oh, what's George doing here?" And it's obviously him. He called me by what he usually calls me. Well, Jay looked up into the alcove where the voice came from, and the lights were off. It was dark as night. So he thought to himself, that's strange. Is he hiding in the dark up there to taunt me with his fiendish lecture from above? Well, needless to say, Jay, who in the past has also told me other stories about ghostly encounters that he's had around the village there of Hillview, one of which is an old 1870s building that they built back in the days of cobblestone foundations and what have you. Well, Jay was going to help me out on it. I was the village grease trap inspector, and there was always a story of this old building. We have to go into the dark, damp, cold basement of this 1870s establishment and check their grease trap. Well, Jay went down there with me, and he didn't make it very far. And it's like, "I'm turning around there, Franklin. I feel the hair on the back of my head standing up. I think there's ghosts or something going on down here, and I don't trust it." So Jay took off, left me by myself to do the grease trap inspection. Well, come to find out, Jay is very sensitive on that kind of thing, and as he's had other ghostly encounters in the past, sort of a, I don't know if you want to call it a medium or a sensitive type in that area, but the story is that place is supposedly haunted from years ago. An old shoemaker was supposedly died of a heart attack in that basement and has been haunting that basement and that for years. And several of the other employees at the establishment had a lot of weird poltergeist type activities going on, and one of which I had myself. I was meeting a guy later on, reflecting back on the episode with Jay. I was there early in the morning and they hadn't opened yet, and we were standing at the door with the owner. He was going to unlock the building for me to get in, and when he did and opened the door, well, this is sort of a restaurant slash bar building, and the stereo on the place was like fully blasting, at full bore. And it's like, why do you have the radio or the stereo system blaring away with nobody in here? And he just looked at me and laughed, and it's like, oh, we turned it off last night, Franklin. That's our resident ghost. Every once in a while we'll come in and he's playing a prank on us and turns the stereo on and turns it up full blast. So to make the end of the long story short here, Jay, when he felt the presence of a ghost in that basement, maybe there really was the presence of a ghost in that basement, because I witnessed firsthand the poltergeist activity of this misbegotten shoemaker from the past. But in any event, our original story, getting back to the Hillview Public Works there, Jay approached Uncle George the next day, and he claimed, just like Pete had claimed to me, that he had slept like a baby down the road there at Hillview, not far from Patterson, in the same subdivision we all live in. And to this day, he swears on a stack of Bibles or whatever that he was there, and calling him an asshole from the dark storage area at the Public Works. I will continue my stories in another file. Happy Halloween, and be safe on Friday the 13th.
And thank you, Franklin B., for all the stories you've sent in. And we'll be hearing more from Franklin in the Halloween episode at the end of October. And if you want to join in, if you have a story that you've been dying to tell about ghosts, send it to lex@anythingghost.com, or go to the website and fill out the contact form there. And then we also share local ghost legends. So if you have a neat little local ghost legend in your town, send it to lex@anythingghost.com. And here's a story from Savanah in the U.S., Hinesville Battlegrounds. In 2009, I got stationed to Fort Stewart, Georgia. For the first 9 months, I lived on the base in an apartment, and my mom stayed with me to help me with my newborn son. For the first few months, everything was fine. Then it started to feel eerie there. Nothing ever happened in the apartment, but we just had eerie feelings. We later began to notice that our storage room light by our driveway would always be turned on. At first we thought it was our neighbor, but they had the same thing happen to them, so they never used the storage room. They thought that someone was doing it and that they were trying to steal their stuff. After a few months, I found a house to rent off the post, so we moved. The new place was bigger, with a backyard, and everything was fine. But one day I wasn't able to come home for lunch, and when I finally came home, my son was asleep, and my mom had a scared look on her face. I asked her what happened, and she said she was cleaning in the kitchen at lunch and thought she heard my car in the driveway and the front door close. So she was talking to me, or thought she was, and then she heard my heavy boots on the kitchen floor walking around while she started to get lunch ready. She finally turned around and saw that no one was there. She poked around the house, thinking I went into my room or into the bathroom. Then she realized my car wasn't even in the driveway. I just wrote it off as maybe it was the TV or something and went on with our night. Fast forward a few weeks. I got home late and went to my room to change. It was dark outside, so I walked to my window to close the blinds. In the reflection of the window, I saw someone walking across the hall behind me that went from the bathroom to the dining room. I ran out, and my mom was in the living room, still with my son. We were freaked out, but we just went to sleep anyway. That weekend, I was cleaning the kitchen while my mom and son were taking a nap. I heard the boots my mom had heard before. I didn't turn around, and I could hear them walking back and forth behind me until finally they stopped right behind me. I turned, and no one was there. And the next story comes to us from the state of Indiana, and it's about a ghost at the DePauw Library in Indiana. And this took place in 1914. So the names that are mentioned here are probably ghosts now themselves. Ghosts once enjoyed the respect of somewhat benighted mankind, and in a measure rivaled only by the influence of the hardest-working witch. But in this day of education, most of the spirits, good and evil alike, are content to remain in their graves. Perhaps this explains the respect gained by DePauw's ghost, for he has the field to himself. One purpose he has, and that he carries out with such persistence that he has become one of the institutions at the Methodist school. The DePauw Library Ghosts exists for the singular and novel design of guarding its priceless volumes of reference works. You may laugh at the story of a library protected by ghosts, yet it is a well-known belief on the DePauw campus that the Whitcomb Library is policed by the spirit of its donor. At the death of former Governor Whitcomb of Indiana, he left to DePauw a large collection of books, among which are some rare and priceless volumes. In his will, Governor Whitcomb specified that they would be used only for reference, and none of them should under any conditions be removed from the library. The books represented years of a collection on his part, and it was by putting them in the library that the donor hoped to have them preserved for centuries. "Aren't any of these volumes ever taken out for any reason?" was asked of Miss Margaret Gilmore, the present assistant college librarian. "Yes," she replied. "Once in a great while, when we have new assistants here, the mistake is made of letting one of them go. But although we guard against it, we never worry much when it happens. You see, the book is sure to come back, for whenever the rule is not complied with, the ghost of the donor walks abroad to see that the volume is returned." "Do many people take this story of the Whitcomb ghost seriously?" she was asked. "Yes, they evidently do," she hastened to reply. "The most recent example I can give you as proof of this happened only a few weeks ago. The Whitcomb Library has always been housed in the old West College building until recently. When they made room for it in this building, in order that it might have better protection, quite a few people here objected very strenuously to the change. They maintained that Mr. Whitcomb meant that the whole of the collection should never be taken from its first keeping place, as well as an occasional volume now and then. When the change was made, some said they would never have anything further to do with any of the books in the collection. Many of the stories are told on the DePauw campus to prove that Whitcomb Library is ghost-guarded. Some of them are vouched for by present-day students. But among all the experiences recited, one stands out especially prominent. It happened several years ago, so long, in fact, that the name of the student concerned has been forgotten. The character in this incident was a freshman. While browsing among the books of the Whitcomb Library one day, he came across a small volume entitled The Poems of Ocean. This little rusty, dust-covered volume had been published in 1789. It was penned in far-off India and sold in Philadelphia. After changing hands some half-dozen times, it finally was brought to the Indiana territory by flatboat and ox cart, arriving as a Christmas gift to the future governor on December 22nd, 1813. This book the freshman carefully slipped into his pocket and carried away. That night the freshman buried himself in the weird lore of this 18th century poet until long past the midnight hour. Before retiring, he carefully concealed the stolen treasure beneath his pillow. He turned out the light, retired, and for a considerable time lay listening to the intermittent noises of the night, made vastly weird by the thoughts his reading had induced. Then, true to the lines of Poe, which raced through his mind, suddenly there came a tapping, as someone greatly rapping at his chamber door. A midnight visitor suddenly stood at the foot of the startled student's bed. Although no door hinge had squeaked, the vapory figure in the habiliments of the coffin loomed gigantic against the black background of the room. A menacing arm protruded from the shroud and pointed at the student, who, moved by fright, crowded against the headboard and imagined he felt the fingertips of the uncanny intruder brush his face. He threw his arm over his head as if to ward off the blow. Fright had paralyzed his tongue. Then, in a cavernous voice, spoke the ghost. "Ocean! Ocean! Who stole Ocean?" And then, after a time, the words grew fainter and fainter as the form faded into the darkness. For a long time the freshman lay in deadly fear of a second visit of the ghost. Then, in frantic moves, he struck the light and bolted the hallway door. He cautiously removed the concealed volume and buried it beneath the cast-off clothes on the top shelf in the wardrobe. The remainder of the night was spent in a half-wakeful vigil, and the first visitor at the library desk the next morning was the freshman. He surrendered the book to the girl at the desk, and at the same time made a clean confession of the theft and of his midnight experience. It is said that the freshman took less interest ever after that in the works of mystery. The same dread of the ghost was entertained a few days later by a co-ed at the women's dormitory. The librarian told the story of the freshman to a group of girls one evening, shortly before the hour of the evening meal. At its close, one girl arose excitedly and asked the regular closing hour for the library. She was told that it was 5 o'clock, and then, with the exclamation, "I have only 10 minutes," she dashed off upstairs to return almost immediately with the volume bearing the Whitcomb seal. She then hastened in the direction of the library. There she quietly slipped into the stockroom and deposited the book, which she, too, had borrowed secretly. DePauw University students are not afraid of ghosts. They laugh if you accuse them of it, But all the same, no one who has been on the campus any length of time ever thinks of asking to keep one of the Whitcomb books out of the library overnight. They can use them so much better for reference work in the library, they say. And that was a haunted library story, from July 19th, 1914. And it happened in Indiana at the the DePauw University. And that library is actually known to be haunted. That one story that I read was actually in Wikipedia. It's kind of more of a folklore thing, but otherwise there have been reports of other ghosts experiences at the library. And I actually have a couple more haunted library stories. I'll read one more. And again, this is from a long time ago. And this one also happened on July 19th, but this was in 1900. But it also took place in a library, and it also happened in Indianapolis, Indiana. W.E. Henry, the state librarian, is much bothered with the proposition whether or not the state library is haunted. The young women attendants have become much alarmed because of peculiar manifestations which not even the philosophical librarian can explain. Last week, while alone in the private office of the librarian, Miss Springer, assistant librarian, noticed that the oval-framed picture of George Washington was rocking from side to side. In great fright, she summoned the librarian, who said it was caused by a draft and laughed at her fears. This morning, strange sounds were heard in the librarian's room, and upon entering, a large mirror was found lying on the floor many feet from where it had been hanging. The librarian again declared it was a draft, but the contrary was shown. Soon after, the oil painting of Governor Claude Matthews began moving backward and forward slowly and ponderously. It is a very heavy frame, and the performance was repeated at intervals. The state library attachés were unable to solve the mystery, and several of them are firmly convinced that spooks are at work, although the librarian will not admit as much. He says, however, the things that have happened are truly strange. I do not believe they have been of supernatural causes, but some of them cannot be explained, it seems, in any other way. That remark followed the discovery that the frame containing the death mask of Abraham Lincoln had slipped down and hung at an angle, making the resemblance to the dead face of the martyred president more apparent. And I have one more haunted library story, but you know what? I'm going to keep that for the Halloween show coming up in a few weeks. Again, if you have a story you want to share, send it to Lex, L-E-X, at anythingghost.com. And that's 2 G's, Anything Ghost. And I didn't mention in this show that there's a VIP group where I house the complete archives of Anything Ghost. And that started in January of 2006. That's a lot of haunted library stories, if any, but it's a lot of ghost stories. And you can get more information by going to anythingghost.com, join VIP. Anythingghost.com, join VIP. There's a one-time membership fee, and you'll have the complete archives at your earbud tips. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for all your stories in this episode of Anything Ghost and in future episodes. Until I talk to you again, have yourself a wonderful week and take care.